I only meant to return a book, but when she quietly closed the door behind me, everything I thought I knew about us changed. The building was almost empty when I arrived. The sun had already slipped low enough to cast long, golden beams across the hallway, and my footsteps echoed softly against the tile. There was something strange about walking through school after hours, quieter, more intimate somehow, as if I wasn't supposed to be there. I had the book tucked under my arm. It wasn't heavy, but it felt significant. She had recommended it to me weeks ago, after class, when she noticed I stayed behind staring at my notes, as if the answer I needed might suddenly appear on the page. I didn't know why her suggestion meant so much to me, but I'd read every page carefully, almost as though I were trying to impress her, which, maybe, I was. I paused at her classroom door. The light was still on inside, faint and warm against the dim hallway. My heart beat a little faster, and I told myself that was ridiculous. I was just returning a book, just saying thank you, nothing more. I knocked lightly, my knuckles barely making a sound. For a moment, I thought she might not hear me, but then her voice came, warm, a little tired, telling me to come in. The door opened smoothly under my hand, and there she was. She wasn't standing at the board or pacing with a stack of papers like she usually did. Instead, she was sitting at her desk, her glasses perched low on her nose, a loose strand of hair brushing her cheek as she looked up. For a second, she just smiled. Not the polite smile teachers give when a student asks a question, but something softer, more personal. "Oh," she said, setting down her pen. "You came back." I held up the book a little awkwardly, feeling suddenly too tall for the room. I wanted to return this, and to say thanks. It was really good. She stood slowly, smoothing the front of her blouse in that absent-minded way that made my chest tighten for reasons I didn't want to examine too closely. "I'm glad you liked it," she said. "Not many people come back to tell me that." Her voice was quiet, thoughtful. She crossed the room toward me, and I caught a faint trace of her perfume, subtle, almost like the scent of tea leaves after hot water hits them. I placed the book gently on her desk, and for a moment I just stood there, unsure if I should leave. The air felt still, like the world was waiting for something. Then she looked at me again, her head tilted slightly, and there was something in her expression, curious, warm, that made me hesitate. And that was when I heard it, the soft click of the door closing behind me. The sound of the door closing was louder than I expected, just a small, clean click, but it seemed to seal us off from the rest of the world. I turned slightly, confused, but she didn't look alarmed. She wasn't frowning or glancing toward the hallway as though worried someone might see. Instead, she stood near the door for a moment, one hand still resting lightly on the handle, watching me with a calm, unreadable expression. "It's quieter this way," she said finally, as though sensing the question on my face. Her voice was soft, almost an afterthought, but the gesture felt deliberate. I tried to focus on something else, anything else, so my eyes moved around the room. The space felt different after hours. The desks were neatly stacked, pushed to one side, and only her desk lamp was on, throwing a pool of golden light over the papers she had been grading. The air smelled faintly of paper, chalk, and something warm, tea, maybe, cooling on the edge of her desk. When she stepped away from the door, I heard the whisper of her shoes against the floor, then the soft rustle of fabric as she brushed past me to place the book back in its spot on her shelf. Her sleeve brushed against the back of my hand, barely, like a breeze, but my whole body went still at the contact. I told myself I was overthinking it, but the truth was, every detail of this moment was sinking into me like ink on paper. "You read it quickly," she said, glancing at me over her shoulder. Her tone was light, but I thought I heard something else there, surprise, maybe even a little pride. "Yeah," I said, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet room. It kept me up a few nights." She smiled, not laughing at me, but with me. The corners of her eyes softened in a way that made her look almost younger, though the faint lines there gave her expression a depth that made my chest tighten. "I was worried you might think it was too heavy," she admitted, returning to her desk. "Not everyone your age enjoys something that slow." I felt heat rise in my face, not embarrassment exactly, but something close. "I think I needed it," I said quietly. She paused, then sat on the edge of her desk instead of behind it, folding her hands loosely in her lap. The choice felt intentional, less formal, more personal, and it made the space between us feel smaller. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The quiet wasn't uncomfortable, but it was charged, like the air before a summer storm. Then she gestured toward the chair closest to her, a faint smile still touching her lips. "Sit for a moment," she said softly. "I want to ask you something." I hesitated only a second before sliding into the chair she'd pointed at. The metal legs made a faint scraping sound on the floor, loud in the hush of the room. My palms rested awkwardly on my knees, but I didn't dare fidget, not when she was looking at me like that, curious but not impatient. She turned away just long enough to reach for the teapot sitting on the windowsill. The steam had thinned but was still curling lazily into the air. Without asking, she poured into a second cup, the faint clink of porcelain almost musical in the silence. "Here," she said, holding it out to me with both hands. I accepted it carefully, my fingers brushing against hers for the briefest moment. Her skin was warm, smooth. It startled me, that simple connection, though I tried not to show it. The tea was faintly sweet, its warmth seeping into my hands, grounding me. She leaned back against the edge of her desk, cradling her own cup, and for a few moments we just drank quietly. The sound of rain beginning against the windows was soft, rhythmic, filling the room like background music. "You know," she said after a pause, her voice thoughtful, "when I gave you that book, I wasn't sure you'd actually read it." I smiled faintly. "You thought I'd just toss it on a shelf?" Her lips curved, amused. "Most people do. And that's fine. It's not for everyone." She tilted her head, studying me. "But you strike me as someone who feels more than you say." I felt my throat tighten a little at that. No one had ever put it quite that way. "I liked how honest it was," I said after a moment. "The way it didn't rush to make everything okay. It felt real." Something shifted in her expression, just slightly. Her shoulders lowered, like I'd taken some invisible weight off her. "That's why I wanted you to read it," she admitted. "Because sometimes I worry I'm failing at this job. That all I do is hand out worksheets and remind people of deadlines." I looked at her, startled. The vulnerability in her voice didn't sound like the teacher I knew, the one who always seemed composed, in control. "You're not failing," I said quietly, the words coming out before I could stop them. She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes softening in a way that made my chest ache. "Thank you," she said at last, her voice lower now, almost a whisper. And just like that, the room felt smaller again. The rain kept falling, steady and calm, and I had the strange sense that we were suspended in a moment neither of us wanted to leave. The conversation faded into a stillness that neither of us seemed in a hurry to break. The rain had gathered strength outside, its rhythm filling the room in place of words. It wasn't uncomfortable, not exactly, but it made me hyper-aware of everything. The steady warmth of the teacup between my palms, the faint hum of the overhead lights, the way her breathing sounded soft, and even from just a few feet away. She set her empty cup down on the desk behind her, the porcelain making a quiet tap against the wood. Then she moved, not away from me, but closer, standing just beside my chair, her hand resting lightly on its back as she turned to glance at the window. The closeness sent a quiet shiver through me. She wasn't touching me, not really, but I could feel the nearness of her, the way the faint citrus of her perfume seemed stronger from here. "It's coming down harder," she murmured, tilting her head toward the rain-slick glass. I nodded, not trusting my voice. She stayed like that for a moment, her weight shifting slightly against the desk, and I caught myself memorizing the way the lamplight softened the lines of her face. She looked almost unguarded like this, not the version of her that commanded a room full of students, but the one who stayed late after everyone else had gone, who brewed tea for herself and sat with a pile of essays she'd probably read twice. I wanted to say something, anything, to keep her there beside me. Instead, I found myself tracing the rim of my teacup with my thumb, my mind scrambling for words that wouldn't sound foolish. "You look like you're thinking very hard," she said suddenly, a smile ghosting across her face. I exhaled a quiet laugh, rubbing the back of my neck. Just realizing how different this room feels when it's empty. Her smile deepened, but it wasn't teasing. "Yes," she said softly, as though she'd been thinking the same thing. "It's quieter. You can actually hear yourself breathe." The air between us seemed to shift then, thickening, though nothing had changed. The storm outside had grown heavier, and the steady drum of rain against the windows felt oddly intimate, like a curtain closing off the rest of the world. She glanced down at me again, her expression unreadable for a moment, and then she said quietly, "You don't have to rush off, you know." Her words caught me off guard. Not just the offer, but the gentleness in the way she said them. It wasn't an order. It wasn't even a request. It was simply an opening, and I realized I didn't want to leave. I set my cup down on the desk carefully, my hand brushing against hers by accident as I did. She didn't pull away. The storm outside hadn't let up, but eventually I knew I couldn't sit there forever. The tea was gone, my hands had started to cool, and yet something in me resisted standing, as if getting to my feet would break whatever fragile, unspoken thing had settled between us. Still, I rose slowly, careful not to scrape the chair too loudly across the floor. She didn't move away from the desk, only turned slightly so that she faced me more fully. "Thank you," I said quietly, unsure if I was thanking her for the book, the tea, or the fact that she had let me stay as long as I had. Her eyes softened, and for a moment she only looked at me, as if trying to decide what to say. Then she nodded once and stepped away from the desk to walk with me toward the door. Each step felt strangely heavy, my awareness sharp. The sound of her shoes against the floor, the faint swish of fabric as she walked beside me, the quiet rain that had become steady background music. When we reached the door, I reached for the handle almost reluctantly. That was when I felt it, her hand, warm and steady, settling gently on my forearm. The touch was light, but deliberate enough to stop me mid-motion. I turned slightly toward her, surprised, and found her closer than I expected, close enough that I could see the faint gold flecks in her brown eyes, close enough that I felt the warmth radiating from her through the space between us. "Wait," she said softly. Her voice wasn't commanding, but it made me still completely. She hesitated, as though choosing her words carefully. "I just wanted to say, today meant something to me. You didn't have to come back to tell me you liked the book. Most wouldn't, but you did." Her thumb brushed once, barely perceptible, against my sleeve, a small motion that sent a rush of heat through me. "I'm glad you did," she finished, her voice low. It made the day feel a little less lonely. Something about the way she said it, quiet, almost vulnerable, made my chest ache. The room felt so still that I was sure she could hear my heartbeat. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. So I just stood there, looking at her, letting the silence speak for me. For a moment, neither of us moved. Her hand remained on my arm, not urging me forward or pulling me back, just resting there. A connection neither of us seemed ready to break. Finally, she withdrew it slowly, almost reluctantly, and gave a small, quiet smile. "Go carefully," she said. I nodded, but I didn't open the door just yet. The rain struck harder against the windows, a sudden gust sending water streaming across the glass. The sound filled the room like a low drumbeat. I stood there with my hand still hovering near the handle, but I couldn't make myself turn it. She hadn't stepped back to her desk either. She stayed near me, one hand lightly touching the frame of the door, as if even she wasn't quite ready to open it. The air felt charged, like something was about to happen. "You'll get soaked if you go now," she said quietly, her voice carrying just enough warmth to make me pause. I glanced toward the window. She was right. The rain looked relentless, the kind that would cling to your clothes no matter how fast you ran. "I don't mind," I said automatically, but even I didn't sound convinced. She smiled faintly, almost as if she knew I wasn't eager to leave. Then her gaze shifted, not at the window, not at the door, but at me. There was something steady in her expression, as though she was taking her time memorizing me the way I had been memorizing her. And then, without thinking, she reached up. Her fingers brushed my forehead first, then swept back through my hair, smoothing it gently where it had fallen loose. The touch was light, careful, but it sent a shiver all the way down my spine. "You're damp already," she murmured, her hand lingering a second longer than it needed to before she let it fall. I didn't move, didn't speak. My heart felt too loud, pounding in my ears. That single touch felt like more than any words we might have said, like something had shifted between us in a way we both understood but weren't ready to name. She seemed to realize it too. Her hand hesitated near her side, as if debating whether to reach out again. Instead, she folded her arms loosely, looking toward the rain with a thoughtful expression. "I've stayed late here so many nights," she said softly. "It's usually so quiet. But tonight feels different." I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. Yeah, I said, my voice low. It does. When she looked back at me, her eyes held mine just a moment too long, enough to make my breath catch. There was no mistaking it now. Whatever this was, it wasn't just teacher and student anymore. Another roll of thunder rumbled faintly in the distance. She glanced at the window once more, then back at me. Maybe wait a little longer, she said, and though it was phrased as a suggestion, there was something in her tone, gentle, inviting, that made it feel like a request. And I nodded, because the truth was, I didn't want to go anywhere. Eventually, the rain eased, softening from a storm into a steady drizzle. The room felt quieter now, as if the storm had taken something with it when it passed. The tension still hummed faintly between us, but it had settled into something calmer, warmer. She glanced toward the window, then toward me, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then she nodded gently, as though deciding something. I suppose I should let you go, she said softly. I didn't move right away. Part of me wanted to stay there forever, memorizing the glow of the desk lamp and the way the rain streaked the glass behind her. But I finally nodded and reached for the door handle. Before I could turn it, she stepped closer. The motion was slow, unhurried, her presence filling the small space between us until I felt her just a breath away. Thank you for coming back, she said, her voice low enough that it felt like it was meant only for me. I opened my mouth to answer, but the words didn't come. There was too much in my chest to say it all, so I just met her gaze, letting the silence speak for me. And then she leaned in. The motion was subtle, not rushed, not hesitant, just deliberate. Her hand came to rest lightly against my shoulder for balance, her touch warm through the thin fabric of my shirt. And then her lips brushed my cheek. It wasn't a long kiss, but it wasn't hurried either. Just a quiet, gentle press of warmth that lingered for a breath before she drew back. When she pulled away, she didn't step back completely. Instead, she let her hand rest on my arm for another moment, her thumb moving in a small, absent-minded stroke over the sleeve. I hope you know, she said softly, that you're one of the few who reminded me why I do what I do. Her words settled in me like something I'd been waiting to hear without knowing it. I nodded, my throat too tight for anything else. Finally, she stepped back just enough to give me space. Go on, she said with a faint smile, though her voice was still soft. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. The air felt cooler out there, carrying the faint smell of rain. I turned once before leaving, and she was still there, standing in the warm glow of the classroom, her expression unreadable but gentle. As I walked down the hall, I touched my cheek where she had kissed me, the warmth still lingering. The rain outside didn't bother me anymore, not when something inside me felt entirely different now. I knew one thing for certain. I would never return a book the same way again.